Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Guys and Jai. I'm Ankur Varma, licensed psychotherapist and co-founder of Brown Man Therapy, a nonprofit focused on normalizing mental health conversations among South Asian men, connecting them to culturally grounded care and building strong community networks. We're very excited to talk to today's guest, who I'll intro in just a second. If you're tuning in for the first time, Guys and Chai is a space where honest, unscripted conversations about mental health, identity, and pressure unfold between men trying to make sense of their lives beyond success. Qasim Rashid is our guest today, and I could probably read you his bio for the whole episode, but I'll keep it kind of short here. So Qasim is a human rights lawyer, author, and former congressional candidate. Professionally, Qasim supports major organizations, small businesses, candidates for office, and nonprofits to improve their corporate strategies, messaging, and innovation. His work has taken him everywhere from representing asylum seekers and domestic violence survivors to advocating for universal religious freedom. He's written for Time, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NPR, and now publishes a daily Substack called Let's Address This. You probably also find Qasim on all your social media platforms, responding to people, clapping back, and informing them of what's actually accurate out there. And so, Qasim, I'm really happy that you could join us today. You probably recognize.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. You recognize that bio probably from one of your websites or one of your bios that's out there publicly, and I like reading those out because that's what people know a lot of times. But really, in the idea of this podcast is for us to learn about the human behind some of the success and some of those titles that you have. And so that's where I'd love to start with you. Is tell us a little bit about the human behind some of the work that you've done.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's always great to have these conversations. I mean, I think I'm just a regular guy who married up, has 3 great kids, and just doing what I can to, Muhammad Ali has a quote that service to others is the rent you pay for your time here on earth, and I'm just trying to make my rent. So that's kind of the extent of it. I love reading. I like running marathons and beating my kids at Mario Kart. No matter how much they insist I let them win, it's not going to happen. So
yeah. Which version of Mario Kart?
So I'll play Mario 64, but I think the Mario Kart 8 on Wii is kind of my thing, or Nintendo Switch. That's kind of my thing at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I consider myself a master of Mario Kart 64, so I love that. I love that. All right, so tell us a little bit about, wherever you want to start, but I know that you've got deep roots here in Chicago as well as Virginia. Your family is from Pakistan. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you came up as you made this journey into the work that you do as a lawyer, as a political and public figure. But where was your upbringing?
We just celebrated Father's Day or observed Father's Day, whatever you want to call it. And I just lost my father last year in March 20th of last year. He passed, and it was his birthday on Juneteenth as well. And so a lot of emotions, a lot of things happening simultaneously. And my parents is where I attribute a lot of my upbringing to, in terms of not just being there emotionally and practically, but also from a principles, morals standpoint. And I think the single biggest lesson that they infused in me was this element of service to others. And I know it sounds cliche and convenient, but I can say with honesty that the only time I ever really got yelled at about stuff was when there was something that a neighbor needed and I was lazy about it, or when there was something that needed to be done for the community and I had to be pushed for it. My father was an Islamic scholar, an Imam, deeply devout, observant Muslim. Never once imposed anything on my siblings or I. Never once forced anything on us from a faith perspective. But when it came time to actually serve the community, there was no debate. It wasn't a question of whether we felt like it or not. It was, you're going to serve your community because that's why you're here. And if you're not willing to do that, then you've missed the entire point. And so that really has kind of framed my upbringing, everything that I've done from undergrad to going to law school to pursuing human rights law to now advocating for marginalized communities. It really kind of stems from this point, this kind of pinnacle, this genesis, that your focus here whether it's your actions or whether it's exemplifying your faith, it they both point to the same thing of how are you doing your best to improve the community around you. And if that's the focus, you're going to be good. If it's not, then his exact words were, you're engaged in a fantastic waste of time.
Hmm. Well, I'm sorry to hear about your father's loss. He was sounds like an amazing man, and imparted some really important values and principles to you that I see in your work to this day. Um, what was it? Did it feel always like, okay, we are part of a community, or I know there are sometimes many communities that we are raised in, especially if we're raised in the US, that we feel part. I know I felt part of, my Hindu Indian communities sometimes, but also then we didn't always live close to those folks. And so I'm curious, how was that for you in terms of being part of the Muslim community as well as the larger community in the places that you were raised?
Well, of course, there's within our Muslim community heavy engagement, youth retreats, adopt a highway cleanups, international trips, and that was always great from a social grounding and upbringing, and keeping company with people doing, maybe ideologically aligned with you. It is important. There's no doubt about that. Socially aligned, it's important. Um, I always think about my earliest teachers when we immigrated to the United States were Black Muslim women and men who
Mm,
were, entrenched in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And so, we got here in the 1980s, and so all the aunties and uncles at the mosque were the Black aunties and uncles that were in the civil rights movement. And for me, that was a big part of my upbringing. And I just kind of took that as normal, that everyone has this upbringing. It didn't really occur to me until many years later that actually I was extraordinarily privileged and fortunate to have that kind of an upbringing. And so that community was kind of the core, the foundation. And then the broader community was, what are we doing to improve the lives of our neighbors around us? The folks who lived around the mosque, the folks who lived around our homes. How did we engage with them in any kind of meaningful way? And for us, and I just wrote about this for my father, that every year, one small thing of many was between Christmas and New Year's in the freezing Chicago winters. He would take us to our neighbors door by door and hand out boxes of chocolate to build that relationship and to kind of acknowledge that it's their holiday as well, and acknowledge a new year and a new opportunity. And I mean, I think that normalization of engagement, of interaction, it was a two-way street, right? Because one, it gave us confidence that, hey, you're part of this community, you're responsible for this community, and you need to be confident in how you engage and how you carry yourself. But then it was also a normalization to our mostly white Christian neighbors, that, hey, there's brown Muslim immigrant families here, and they are your neighbors, and they're here to reach out to you and to receive you. And some may not have felt the same way about us as we did about them. They may not have been as opening, but that's okay, because that's the whole point of the engagement, of the interaction, of to be able to have those conversations. And again, that's something that I'm trying to infuse in my wife and I are trying to infuse in our kids today. That's something that I try to continue to do the work that I do today. So it's kind of cool for me now, after my parents they're both passed, after they're gone, to kind of reflect back and kind of trace the lineage of the work that we're doing now and trace it back to 35, 40 years ago, when at the time I had no idea what was down the road. My father did, and he set me down that path, and now I can look back and understand and see what he saw that I just couldn't have seen back then.
This culture of service in your family, does it go back to Pakistan? Did it start with your parents? Where did that come from? 'Cause it seems really embedded.
Thank you. I mean, it the core of this is what Islam teaches, that your responsibilities are two as a Muslim: service to God and service to humanity, and you cannot fulfill your service to God unless you first fulfill service to humanity. This was kind of the core, and there's a really, like in the family lore, there's a story of my grandfather who was the first person to join our particular Muslim community. He grew up as a Sunni agnostic. He joined the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. He was the only one in his village to have done so. And he was a scholar. He was a school principal and an academic and scholar, and he joined the community. And as a result, he went from being welcomed by the entire village to being kind of the outcast. But because he was also by no means wealthy, but he was able to make ends meet in a more consistent manner. One of his neighbors was extraordinarily destitute and also extraordinarily abusive. And despite that, he would make sure that his neighbor had a meal every night. This was something that was sacred to him. And one day, this neighbor said some extraordinarily abusive things to my grandmother. And my grandmother responded in kind, not in an abusive way, but in a way that said that it doesn't, you shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you. And the family lore is that when my grandfather heard of this, he became extraordinarily upset and embarrassed and went to this person and asked for their forgiveness and gave them more food as an apology. And to me, I get emotional thinking about it, but I mean, my grandmother and grandfather had a wonderful marriage and lasted until they departed. But in this situation, as much as he loved his wife, he wasn't willing to let ego get in the way of doing what needed to be done. And there's a verse in the Quran that says, let not a people's enmity against you cause you to act other than with justice. Be always just. And to me, this is the exemplification of that this neighbor was acting unjust. He was acting like a complete, jerk, whatever, pejorative you want to describe him as. But my grandfather knew that his obligation was to serve his neighbor, not for any other reason than this was the obligation that God had imposed upon him that he had willingly accepted. And as a result, he wasn't willing to let ego get in the way or to say, I'm only going to help you because you're nice to me. He was, I'm going to support you and serve you because it's the right thing to do. It's the moral and just thing to do. And so I think about that often. It's, it's easy in hindsight to look back and say, well, what a great thing he did. But when you're in the situation, it's a lot more difficult. And I think that's a standard that we need to call ourselves to. It's a standard I kind of call myself to. And again, I want to reemphasize, my grandfather didn't do this of his own accord. He did this because this is what the Islamic teaching is. You can look at examples of the life of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be upon him, where this was exemplified in his life. And I think that's really what we're called to do. It can't be contingent upon whether somebody is the same religion as you or the same, class or creed or whatever differentiating factor you want to call it. It has to be whether the other person is a human being or not. And if they are, then that should be the only qualification. There should be nothing else necessary for us to do whatever we can to support those around us. And I'm grateful that that's something that our parents infused in us at a very early age.
So putting the community and putting these values above self. And again, that feels like a really tough battle, that you're talking about with your grandmother and what is the limit to the abuse that you can take. And your grandfather's perspective seemed to be, doesn't matter. This is for for a greater good of sorts. And one of the thoughts that I had for you or questions that I have for you is because, it's funny. I've limited my social media intake in a lot of ways, but there are times where I'll jump on it. It doesn't matter, Reddit or, Threads or wherever it is. And somebody will be giving a response to some misinformation. And it feels like half the time it's you. And I look at the name and I'm like, oh, that's Qasim giving the right information or the clarification or the history or the knowledge that is necessary for the context here. And, and one thing I wanted to ask you about, because I sometimes struggle with this, is how do we keep up the good fight in the midst of adversity? And in the midst of hatred sometimes, and maybe that's not a direct connection to this exact story, but in some ways, I think I've seen that in my own communities in terms of where I grew up in Ohio and 9/11 happening, and then the impact on the Muslims in our community, and so I'm just curious, where do you keep finding the energy to do this and to do it it's always respectful. It's always without belittling the other person or patronizing them. And so, what is your secret?
I don't think it's anything special, or I don't see it as any kind of a big deal. I think you're being extraordinarily kind, and I'm appreciative of you for being kind, and that's in your nature to be kind, and I appreciate that about you. I'll also add, I don't think it's anything special to give me a pat on the back for. I mean, it's kind of the bare minimum in my view. And I think my perspective is that the problems that we're trying to solve are, how do we end world hunger? How do we end poverty? How do we end disease? How do we end abuse? those are the things that we're trying to solve. I can't get distracted or get offended in a way that makes me lose my focus because somebody called me a sand N-word, which happens regularly. It doesn't solve anything, right? If I get distracted by somebody, like a squirrel, like with the next, acorn that falls, missing the fact that we're trying to save the tree, then it's a waste of my time. And so that's my first focus, that I'm not here to worry about some ordinary person on the internet with, a name and a bunch of numbers who's probably a bot trying to rile me up. That's one. Two, I see there's a much greater value in a term I've coined called collateral education, where whoever the person I'm responding to, I don't actually expect them to accept that they were wrong, because that's just not the way human beings work, right? Facts, unfortunately, don't convince people that they're wrong. That's just, and we're not hardwired that way for whatever reason. What I'm focused on is who else is watching. I've got a large platform. I've got millions of people who follow my social media and millions more who see my content. The social media gives you the impression counts nowadays. And, in a given month, I'm getting several 100 million people that are reading my content across the internet. And so my view is, whoever this troll is, I may or may not be able to get through to them. But guess what? The fact that this information is out there, it means that people have questions and they may not have the ability to know where to look or how to find a reliable answer. And so for me, it's how do I be unassailable in my facts, in my integrity? How do I bring the receipts so it's people can know that they can trust me, so that when I do provide an answer, even if they may not have all the information up front, at the minimum, they've followed me long enough to know that, hey, I only put out verified factual information. Or if I make a mistake, which I'm, a human being, I will rectify that and own up to it. And so that to me is the real win, where someone, may not be convinced, but those around them, the collateral impact, the collateral education is such that we change the narrative. We shift the Overton window. We create better conditions for understanding and tolerance. And, I can't go a week or even a couple of days, and sometimes multiple times a day, where someone will email me and say, hey, I had this wrong view, but after reading your response, I have a better understanding and I appreciate that. And that's all you can ask for, right? I mean, it's not anything grand. Sometimes it's a DM, sometimes it's a quick one-liner email. But for me, it's enough. It's an indication that, hey, this is actually working and this is actually having an impact. And that's where I think I draw a lot of energy from, to know that we're winning one more person at a time. Because I'll tell you this, and I'll not to kind of belabor the point, but I have this distinct memory from my childhood. I was maybe 7, 8 years old, maybe 9. I can't remember. It was definitely before I was 10, but I was a young child. And back in the days before cell phones, we had answering machines where you'd go out for the night to dinner, to an event. You'd come home and you check the messages on your answering machine. And I remember coming home one night after some, dinner or davat. We went to someone's home. We come back at 9, 10 o'clock at night. And my dad goes into his office to check the answering machine. And, I'm following him. And the message played was some alleged Christian who claimed he was Christian, but the most, reckless, disgusting verbal attacks and assaults, dehumanizing name calling, anti-Muslim, sand, N-word, you name it, right? Just kind of across. Mm-hmm. And I remember the look on my father's face, and it was a look of pain, and I didn't quite understand it. And I realized later that it wasn't that he was offended. It was that he realized that his son is going to grow up in this world, and that this is the kind of world that I'm going to be facing. And, as fate would have it, the week after my father died, I was taking my kids to his cemetery to, again, just pay respects, because, they missed their grandfather as well. And while we're driving there, somebody pulls up next to us and starts spewing the exact same kind of hateful rhetoric towards me. Wow. And I flashed back to 35 years prior when, 7, 8-year-old me saw this, and now my kids around the same age hearing the exact same thing in real time. And to me, it was this full circle moment of, we need to do more, because this can't happen. I can't have my kids be 40 years old, 45 years old, and then face the same thing with my grandkids hearing the exact same thing. It's not sustainable. It's not viable. It's indefensible. Absolutely. And so for me, that's where I get the energy, that we need to keep giving hope to our kids, as James Baldwin talks about. And we can rest when we're dead, but in the meantime, while we're here, we can't give up. The stakes are too high to give up. It's exhausting, I know. It's infuriating, enraging, I know, but we can't be hopeless. We can't give up.
Hmm. Yeah, I really love that as a kind of a remotivator or filler of your cup. And being able to reframe these things is sometimes really, really challenging. Could, did you ever waver when you were younger? Did you ever doubt? Did it always feel pretty solid that you could, rely on these values as a go-to, or did you have any sort of, I don't know if rebellious phase is the right, but questioning of certain things or questioning of the work, and how did you move through that?
Well, what helped immensely was that everything my father preached, he practiced. Everything my parents preached, they practice. I think a lot of people who kind of go through um, that struggle. One reason why I don't want to give generalizations, but one reason why is because the people that they looked up to, they realized that they actually don't practice what they preach themselves. And one thing that I saw was there was nothing that um, my dad asked me to do that he wasn't already exemplifying himself. And so it wasn't that, hey, I'm going to sit here and hang out. You go and figure it out. It was let's do this together and come with me. And that was leadership. So that helped immensely. And like I said, on a faith perspective, there was never a force or a push that you have to do this, you must do this, or you must believe this, or don't ask questions and believe blindly. That was contrary to everything that we were taught. If we had questions, let's answer them. Let's talk about them. Bring the questions. Read the books by the critics. And I think that's where kind of to more specifically answer your question is on that side when I had questions and it did bother me. It wasn't let me prove the people being critical of Islam wrong and prove us right. It was go figure it out. It wasn't that let me give you the answer. It was go read the books, read the critics, see what they have to say, understand it for yourself. And that to me was a big validator as well, because as frustrated as I was, it wasn't this indoctrination of, oh, those guys are wrong and you don't even need to read their stuff. Let me just tell you why they're wrong. It was, yeah, go read it. There's nothing, if you have truth, you have nothing to be afraid of. Um, and that to me was so revolutionary because I think so often in this society, we are afraid to ask questions because it might be taboo. We're afraid
Yeah.
to look behind the veil because we're afraid of what we might see. And from the way we were raised, when I started to have questions or doubts, it wasn't, hey, slow down, pull back, you're going down the wrong path. It was speed up, go faster, see what's behind that veil, understand it first, let them make the argument, understand why they believe what they believe. And I mean, that I love that because it's opened my mind to everything else because it's not just a matter of faith now. Now it's, hey, based on the facts that I have in front of me, this is what I think is the right answer. But if you think you have better facts, then give them to me. And guess what? I will change my perspective with new facts, with new information. It removes the ego from the conversation and forces yourself to say, hey, I have to be honest with my conscience. And this has helped immensely. I went to law school. I'll give you one example, thinking the death penalty is a really good idea. Like there's people who've done horrible crimes and horrible, unforgivable crimes. And yeah, the death penalty makes sense in those situations. I left law school convinced that the death penalty needs to be abolished. And it was because I had I had been trained and I had trained myself to look at the facts as opposed to looking at some kind of an emotional response. And as staunch of an advocate as I was for the death penalty going into law school, I'm a staunch opponent of the death penalty because now I understand facts that I didn't have before, insights that I didn't have before. And so I don't see doubt as a bad thing. In fact, I see it as an excellent thing. I see it as a wonderful thing. Why have a mind if you're going to limit where it can question? Why have an intellect if you're going to handicap it and stifle it from thinking and maximizing its impact? every idea, every innovation, every creation that's out there was at one times, thought to be crazy and insane and a waste of time. And lo and behold, some of the greatest technological advancements happened because somebody said, well, why not? And they pushed conventional wisdom and they achieved something that nobody else thought was possible. And so I think you have to have doubt. And so I don't think that doubt's ever a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I think the only time it becomes problematic is when the people that are asking you to believe in something or do something themselves don't do it. That hypocrisy is repulsive to people, and it should be repulsive. But I think that's where it causes real pain because now, I'm not my example, but this is the infamous example of Malcolm X and why he left the Nation of Islam, because he began to see the grotesque hypocrisy of Elijah Muhammad and realized that this is not what I signed up for. And he made the right decision and left. I mean, that thought in my mind came kind of out of left field, but I was trying to think of a good example. And I think that is the one. And again, but that goes back to him being committed to truth and justice over all else. And he was able to make a decision as a result of that.
Yeah, there's, I mean, a few things there that I really love about what you're getting at. And, a lot of what you're getting at is also central to the kind of the tenets of good therapy, right? Is to push forward when we start to question and understand and approach things with a level of curiosity and a critical eye rather than to let ego drive or fear drive. And, what you shared about your father, leading by example connects with, I recently heard Dr. Vivek Murthy, former U.S. Surgeon General, speak, and he also spoke about the leadership that his parents exemplified in their actions and how that then has continued and how he wants to continue that for his kids. But, I love what you're talking about because it also connects to what you said earlier when you're use the example of the acorn and the squirrel getting distracted. I think that's a really good way to put it because then we don't look at the tree. We don't look at the bigger issue, the root causes of certain things. And a lot of times social media and the platforms that are now available to people are really effective, right? They can be really important and powerful. We have seen, regimes toppled because of people's access to information and to each other and the ability to collaborate and build community for these just causes. And so, I think what sometimes happens if we get into these ego debates online, the other side of this is that then we forget to recognize the humanity in each other, right? The anxiety or the fear from which those hecklers that you deal with online, that they're coming from a place of worry, of concern for something in their own lives. And they feel like, something is being taken, that they're being maybe misinformed or they don't have the whole story. But to fight them just on that level and just to fight back is like my anxiety fighting your anxiety never leads to, somewhere healthy. So I love the idea of welcoming doubt. I think that's so important here and allowing then this critical eye and the curiosity to take the wheel, so that, we can explore it together and let's both change our minds if necessary, or both of us adapt our knowledge. That's what that's the point, right? We hope that our kids know more than us because they have more access to information. They have better technology, whatever that looks like. And so I really love how you put that together.
I want to double down on a point you made that I've thought a lot about. In some ways, whether somebody sends me an extraordinarily positive and thoughtful email or, a love note, so to speak, for lack of a better word, versus a hate note, in one strange way, it's coming from the same place. And what I mean by that is they're both coming from a place of self-preservation. Someone sees something positive in me and they want to connect and they want to be able to build a bridge to say, hey, yeah, we should reinforce this because it makes me feel safer. Someone sees something that they perceive as a threat, then it's the fight or flight response. They're going to fight and say, hey, you don't threaten me. I'm safe in who I am and you're not going to threaten me. And it sounds strange to say, but responding in kind to the one who's being threatening is just going to reinforce the hate. But responding in a positive way, it may not diminish the hate, but at least it won't exacerbate it, or it decreases the risk of exacerbating it. And it allows there to be an opportunity for them to come back later and say, hey, maybe I was wrong or maybe I misjudged. And that's one of the things that I often see happen as well. I remember not long after Israel began its genocidal assault on Gaza, I got some pretty nasty emails from people who were upset that I was calling this a genocide because I believe it absolutely is a genocide. And several folks since then, in the years since, have responded and said, I better understand. And you're right, this is a genocide, but I just want to apologize for the way that I treated you. And my response every single time has been, it's not me you need to apologize for. Let's now work together on stopping this injustice. This is not about my personal ego. It's how do we work together and create a narrative where no one suffers this kind of atrocity or harm. But I think that requires recognizing that at the end of the day, we all, with the exception of a few sociopaths out there, we all across caste, color, and creed want the same thing. And that's just a safe world for our children and a better future for our next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes me back to, I think the first time you and I met was a couple years ago when you were on a panel for another organization I'm part of, South Asian Solidarity Movement. And we talked about, disrupting Islamophobia. And, I think a lot of this is creating space for information. I remember people that walked away from that conversation that still reference it, that we've talked to in our community, where, they felt heard, and they also felt open to changing their mind. And you have to be able to create that space for each other, right? Rather than forcing somebody into a new box is going to be really hard for the process of change.
Well said.
I want to switch to you, back to you and your personal journey a little bit. I know that you have run for office, both in Virginia as well as here in Illinois. And I know that comes with, I have a friend way back in the day that ran for office, and I saw a little bit of his journey, and how difficult that is. I'm curious, what that was like for you to take your work, into this public kind of sphere, and what came with that journey. I know you didn't win, quote unquote, win those elections, but and I know we live in this world of everything is either a win or a loss, a success or a failure, and part of the work that I try to do in this podcast is really understanding kind of the journey behind these things, and so I'm curious if you can share any insights of your journey into politics, these races, or lessons that you learned from those.
I love the revolution we're seeing in the politics right now on the left. We're seeing people like Zoran Mamdani in New York City, obviously, Christopher Rabb in Pennsylvania, Melad Kiros in Colorado, Salam Bhatti in Virginia. We're seeing people who look like us, both physically but also from a lived experience standpoint, finally get their day. And not as an anecdote, but we're seeing a significant number of folks either getting elected or getting very close to being elected, and doing it on our values of compassion and unity. And I think that's kind of, for me, the bigger picture here. I ran, I can point to what I'm happy about. I'm proud of the fact that we won competitive primary elections twice with record turnout. I'm proud of the fact that even though we lost in general, we had record turnout, more than any Democrat in the history of those districts. I'm proud of the fact that we built, these massive volunteer armies. And I'm proud of the fact that those kinds of conversations continue to help push the Overton window. And that's the thing, right? I mean, in Knock Down the House, the documentary, AOC talks about, for one of us to get through, 100 of us have to run. And that's just a fact. And it would have been great to be the one who got through, but somebody has to be the other 100 for the one to get through. And when your focus is ultimately changing the narrative and shifting the Overton window, it cannot be about me, me, me. It has to be about we, the team, like the organization, the concept, the societal benefit. And so I feel extraordinarily grateful that I've had the chance to run. Who knows what the future holds? I've got no plans right now, but the future, hopefully I live many, many, many more decades and we'll have those opportunities as well. But I think it's, to me, a validation of what this country can be. That an immigrant from a low income background can run and be a legitimate candidate, a Democratic nominee, win the nomination. And it speaks to where I think more in our South Asian community need to be involved as well. We're great at being doctors and lawyers and engineers, and blue collar workers. But all those jobs are honorable. We also need to be great at being civically engaged and have a meaningful role in the civic process. It's I think often I often reflect on the fact that given the history of white supremacy in our nation that has also inflected our immigration policies, our communities couldn't really immigrate here with any kind of reasonable ease until after 1965. And so, in many respects, we're still in the infancy, right? If you think about it, 1965 to now is what, only 60-ish years. We got here in '87, only 22 years after. They lifted the ban on South Asian immigration. Of course, Thind versus United States, 1923 banned all South Asian immigration. That was on the books until 1965, and so we're still in the infancy. And I think our parents' generation got here, literally moved heaven and earth to get here. Many of them selling everything they had to afford the move, started with scratch, and they've given us platforms now to be able to accomplish what they never could. And I think it's up to us now, it's our obligation I was born in Pakistan, but I was 4 years old. I was raised here. So yes, I'm an immigrant, but in many ways, I'm also, kind of a born American in the context of I'd never experienced any kind of adult life in Pakistan. It's all over here. But definitely for my children and your children, the next generation, yes, they should be doctors and lawyers and engineers, and they should infuse civic engagement at the local, state, and federal level in mass numbers. And I think what I learned by running for office was, one, that we are undercutting our own success by not being involved in there, and two, we have some amazing talent in our communities, and we should showcase that talent by helping them get elected into positions of leadership.
Yeah, I love how you frame this about and taking from what AOC said, in terms of, for one of us to succeed. And that really, as I hear you talk about it, connects with kind of those values that you spoke about from your family, from your father, right? Putting the ego aside to push things forward, right? To push the envelope, to normalize it, right? There's so much I know we grew up, any brown, South Asian, Muslim, like that was their identity on the public facing, like nothing beyond that, nothing about the human beyond it. It was always the first this or the first that or the second this, right? And now, because there's this been process of normalizing, where I heard Dr. Murthy speak was at the South Asian Political Impact Conference, which is amazing to me because now there's so many South Asian politicians and representatives in so many levels of government. And, for me growing up in the 90s and the 80s to even imagine that would be possible is still a little mind blowing and awe inspiring. And so I love the way that you frame that because you have pushed the envelope and you have made it more acceptable for us to talk about some of these things that within our own communities, culturally, religiously, whatever it might be, may not be the status quo. And so I really appreciate that. How do you talk a little bit about now, a lot of us know public facing you. What is private facing you like? What's the be like when you put the mic away and you go out of your studio? What's life like for you?
I'm the same guy that you see online. There's literally no difference. I might engage with my kids a little bit differently by laughing with them and tickling them and wrestling with them and roughhousing as parents do with kids. But I am the same guy, and there's no like TV face or radio face, and then personal friend face. And my friends will tell you that this is just who I am, and that's the only person I know how to be. I don't understand the folks who have. I mean, unless you're an actor, which of course requires you to act in a certain way, But I don't understand people who in the public eye of any level who kind of change who they are depending on who they're around. I think it's exhausting. I think it's
Mm.
insincere, and I think it's someone who is um, maybe insecure about themselves. I don't know. I don't. You're the expert in the psychotherapy space, not me. So I don't want to speculate. But look, I mean, I think for me, all of this that I'm doing is not. It's not a means to like make a living. I love what I do, and that's why I do it. And I'm grateful that I can make a living off of it. I'm grateful that I can pay the bills and put clothes on my kids' back and food in their tummy, doing what I love doing. And I think that's an important part of this for me. One of the things that anyone in my family will tell you is that um, if my mind is committed to something, then I'm not gonna stop unless it's done.
Mm.
And if I'm not convinced of something, or if there's something I don't want to do, like, short of God Himself, I'm not going to do it. Right?
Was that always true for you?
Probably, yeah. I think I was probably the stubborn one. I mean, I was a middle child, right? So I was probably the stubborn one growing up. And so, it just so fortunately happened that I enjoyed school and academics and studying. It just so fortunately happened that I enjoy sports and being outdoors and whatnot. And so it was fortunate that the things I like doing were also good habits as well. I mean, but that discipline, I think, of course, is important. But I going back to your question, that like, I mean, the guy I am off camera is a guy you're going to see on camera, because that's the only way I know how to be. I think life's too short to put on a mask and be somebody you're not, and that can get you in trouble sometimes. But when you take controversial positions, and like I'll just to air that out to be more explicit what I'm talking about. Um, After 10/7, I was advised by many people that don't talk about Israel Palestine, and I said I will talk about Israel Palestine because I'm a human rights lawyer and it's my job to talk about Israel Palestine. And I certainly lost clients. I lost business. There's no doubt about it. I think I went almost a 2-year span without getting a single offer to be a speaker at an event, whereas usually I spoke on panels and events, paid gigs pretty regularly. And I can say with confidence that not once did I think to myself, yeah, I should have stayed quiet. Because what the hell's the point of staying quiet? To make a couple extra bucks? Like, I don't get it. And I say this as somebody who grew up low income, who grew up on food stamps and Section 8 housing. So I can attest to what it's like to struggle and not know whether you're going to be able to make rent or make ends meet. And so I'm not speaking from a position of, look at me, I'm a multimillionaire. I'm not. It would be nice if I was. But my whole point is that at the end of the day, I have found that life is far more rewarding and my mental health is far better when I can just be honest with myself and the public about who I am, what I believe, and be transparent and consistent about that. And that's kind of what I strive to do. That's what I strive to, the version you see is the version my kid sees, the version that my wife sees, and life is better that way.
Yeah, and I appreciate you talking about that because I think that is what's hard. I work a lot with men in therapy, and a lot of times, whatever it's showing up as on the outside, on the surface, can vary from person to person. But a lot of times, the work that we're really doing is kind of melding the masks or removing the masks, right? And you know, if you are A person at work and B person at home and C person, with friends and family, it's really hard to keep those pieces, in line, right? And to remember which is which and when do I put this one on and that one on, and that's really at the crux of a lot of the identity work that happens in therapy is who am I? And on a recent episode, the guest was talking about asking yourself that question multiple times through your life, right? Not just a one time, okay, I'm an adult now, or now I'm into my career. Who am I? Because then we get into identifying with just kind of that outward label rather than what we truly are on the inside. And so I really like this idea of, putting it down, right? So that you don't, it's so much work to maintain the masks. And then what happens eventually too is then you don't remember which mask am I actually on the inside. And so, Really appreciate that response. I know we're heading here towards the end. I'd love to understand, two pieces here. So I'd love to understand kind of anything specific or general that you are paying attention to as a parent, as a father, for your kids and how you're raising them in this world, which is different from the world that you and I grew up in, that our parents grew up in, right? With technology, with access to information, with AI, with anything, that we're experiencing. I'm curious kind of how you're focused on raising your kids and any tools that you go to that are useful to you.
I'm paying very close attention to the impact of social media on children and how it's impacting mental health. It's increasing rates of depression, even rates of suicide among children. And so we're very closely monitoring how much and how our kids utilize and engage social media. And I get asked this question often that, given how active I am on social media, I bet your kids are constantly on social media, or I bet your kids love social media. And I'll be honest, it's kind of an arrogant question. It's kind of an assumptive, question that insinuates that my wife and I maybe aren't able to control our kids. And so I do kind of take exception when I get asked that question. Because very fortunately, we've built an extraordinarily, I think, thoughtful system with our kids where we don't ban social media, but the way they engage it or consume it is productive. It's a way to help them. It's not just doom scrolling. It's, hey, what do you want to learn today? Oh, I want to learn how to do this. Great. Let's look that up and see how that works, and then let's go do it ourselves, and I'll do it with you.
Mhm.
And that to us has been an extremely useful way to utilize social media and teach them the right way to use it. Oh, how do you fix this thing on a car? Let's go look up a video and figure out how to fix this. Oh, how do you make this garden bed? Let's do it. How do you draw this? Let's look at that, and then let's actually do it ourselves. So there's a means to the end. So we're teaching them how to use it as a tool. And again, I am fortunate. I'm very privileged that my career allows me to be present way more than most parents. I work from home. I travel a lot, but if I'm out of the house, 90% of the time it's because I'm traveling out of state or out of country. But otherwise, I'm home. I get to drop my kids off at school. I get to be home when they get home for the most part, unless I'm traveling, and that makes a big difference. I work out. This morning after Fajr prayer, my son and I went to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we got our workout in at the gym together. And it'd be easy for me to say, "Hey, don't be lazy, go and work out," while I sit in this nice, warm, comfy bed. That would be easy, but that's also hypocrisy for me, and it's contrary to what I was taught by my father. And so it's a win-win because I get my workout in, he gets his workout in, we get some time to bond together, and it's a core memory for him. It's a core memory for me. And it's for my other kids as well. If I'm going to go for a run, they're younger, and they're 10 and 13, so they can't keep up with me. But guess what? They've got brand new bikes, and it's summer vacation, and I'm going for a run, and I run, and they bike with me. And so it allows us to, being present is critical in this space. And again, I want to emphasize, I know parents are working 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and it's tough. I will just say this, that it's not so much the quantity of time, but the quality of time. It's the dedicated time where it's one on one, where there's no distractions, where even if it's an hour, even if it's half an hour, it's a dedicated window. And when kids know that they are the center of attention in that space, it goes a long way. That's how you build identity. That's how you build trust. So that's one thing we're watching closely because social media changes so quickly, and there's just a new thing out every week. But I think by being present, by utilizing it as a tool effectively, and by being deliberate with them, helping children understand that they are the center of your world, it can go a long way towards building those relationships that we all want.
Yeah, I love that. How do you maintain your boundaries with social media, given that that's a prominent platform for you? Are you able to kind of take some time off or step away,
Yeah.
as necessary?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't really use social media for social reasons at all. I have my social friends that I use for social reasons. But you won't really catch me doom scrolling. You don't really catch me getting into internet beefs with people, or that kind of back and forth stuff. I utilize it as a tool to gain information, to research information, to be deliberate and accurate. And I'm using the broader term. I don't just mean like social media apps, but the internet in general. And so I make a deliberate point as well, at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, to take about a week to 10 days and just shut off my social media, period, personal. Let me just be away from it. Don't check it. Don't check apps. Don't check notifications, DMs, nothing. And it's great because the same thing happens every year. The first 24 hours, I feel the anxiety and the desire to check and the desire to reach my phone. The second 24 hours, it's a bit more balanced. By the third day, I'm like, I don't want to go back. I like not having a ding every 5 seconds. And when I finally go back after about 10 days, it's with mental clarity, it's with a mental refocus, and it feels fantastic. And so, something I highly recommend. But it's also a great way for me to force gut check myself that am I getting addicted to something without realizing it? Because that's how addiction happens, right? You don't realize it's happening. And inevitably, because those first 24 hours, I can sense a bit of anxiety. It tells me, yeah, you were on this too much. You needed a mental health break. This is the break you need. Just relax. And that helps calm me down, and then I feel great. And as quickly as I feel the anxiety, it dissipates as quickly. And then I typically don't want to go back, and I have to go back because I got to make a living somehow.
Yeah, I have a similar experience where I'll take some time off, and then, of course, we built Brown Man Therapy initially on Instagram, and I have a hard time now sometimes going even on there and checking things, and my wife has to nudge me like, hey, you need to respond to some things or do some things.
Yeah.
So
because you've built a community, you've built people who trust you and trust you for your content and your insights, and I want to honor that, and I don't want anyone to feel abandoned in that sense either. I mean, I've built real, genuine, meaningful friendships with folks. I genuinely care about the people who follow my content or engage with my content. And I consider it an obligation to provide them that service of information on human rights that they're not going to get elsewhere. I mean, so to me, like, it's a calling. It's something I deeply cherish. But even things you deeply cherish, you need a break from sometimes, and it's important to have those breaks too.
Absolutely. Well, Qasim, thank you so much for joining. I really enjoyed this conversation, and really am still sitting with this kind of aura of service that you've communicated here, right? And how that's helped kind of guide you through different pieces of your life and different journeys. And so thank you very much for joining today. Anything that you'd love to share with our audience about you, about where to find you, anything that is coming up for you?
Sure. No, I would love everyone's support. You can find me across social media platforms at my name, at Qasim Rashid, across Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, whatever your preferred social media platform is. I'm probably already on there. It's just my handle. I was fortunate enough to grab my handle as my name. And then my Substack is just my website. Again, my name, QasimRashid.com. No paywall. You can be a paid subscriber if you want, but there's never a paywall. You don't get any special access for being a paying subscriber. You just get the good vibes of knowing you're supporting independent media, and would love to have everyone join and help us continue to build this community.
All right, Qasim, thank you so much again, and hope to talk to you soon.
Amen, brother. Thank you.
All right, take care. Hey, everyone. So I just finished up my conversation with Qasim Rashid. I'm really sitting with a lot of it, and I'm going to continue to digest, but I want to just talk about my initial reflections on this conversation. The thing that sticks out to me is the power of Qasim's value system, and the lessons he learned observing his father, his family, in their service to their communities, and service without terms. In the face of abuse, adversity, of whatever form, whether it was in Pakistan or here in the U.S., this theme of giving to others, and providing to others because that is your belief system rather than what they have done to deserve it, I think is really, really powerful. And I think that's a theme that continues to show up in really, nuanced, intricate ways in the ways that he thinks about his own work. You know, and if you haven't seen, you know, some of his work, you're not familiar with his social media presence, you know, I highly recommend, that you take a look, because, you know, he does it by removing his ego. And, you know, he doesn't attach to the emotions of the person that might be spewing sometimes hatred towards him, sometimes just small disagreement in belief systems. But he does it, and he uses term collateral education, you know, and thinking about not the nut, but the tree. And I really think that's important framework here for us, because really what he's talking about is approaching things with curiosity and with a critical eye. And when we approach things with a critical eye, that doesn't mean that we are saying I am right and you are wrong. We are saying that there is some truth out there. Let's go find it. And that is a we process rather than a you and I process. And so, you know, I really think that's so important these days, not just, you know, in this political landscape that we are in, where there's so much black and white, there's so much just two-sidedness to things, but really how we think about our own inner congruence. You know, how do we, as he talked about a little bit later in the conversation, how do we manage our masks? And for him, he doesn't have a mask. He tries not to. And that is such a challenge for us, because I think we get so caught up in what we're supposed to be, that we forget about who we want to be, who the I is. And I think Qasim shows that you can still have the I while thinking about the we, by thinking about the greater collective, the greater community. And in fact, I think, you know, the last thing that sticks out to me is that for him, service is a very important mental health tool. And, you know, that is something that is shown to help our mental health, is to be in service of others, to be in community with others. And so, you know, I really value Qasim's time today and the wisdom that he's imparted about his own experiences, his family values, and even how he has decided to show up in for his family and for his community. So thank you again for tuning into another episode of Guys and Chai. Hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody.